Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep into the book of Judges today, chapters 1 through 21. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. Ancient Israel, the promised land, all that.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating period. It gets pretty raw and unfiltered. You see how human nature plays out, even among God's chosen people. This push and pull between faith and the allure of the surrounding culture, it's something we can all relate to, even today, thousands of years later.
It starts right after Joshua dies, Judges 1. The Israelites are supposed to conquer the promised land. But, well,
Yeah.
it doesn't exactly go to plan.
Not at all. You could say the conquest is incomplete, and it echoes through the whole book. It's like they're moving into a new house but can't seem to get rid of the old tenants.
And those tenants, the Canaanites, they brought all their stuff with them. Right, their own gods, their own customs.
Exactly. It's almost like a recipe for disaster. You have these two very different cultures trying to occupy the same space. That tension sets the stage for everything that follows. The cycles of turning away from God and then being rescued.
A spiritual tug of war, you can say.
Exactly. The Israelites keep getting pulled back to what's familiar, what feels comfortable, even if it means compromising their faith.
And that's where the judges come in. Extraordinary people chosen by God to rescue his people. But they're not your typical heroes, are they?
Not at all. They come from all walks of life, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and some very unusual methods. Just look at Ehud, a left-handed judge who takes out the Moabite king Eglon.
How did he do that?
With a double-edged sword he had hidden, it was a surprise attack. Talk about cunning.
It's like something straight out of a spy movie. This seemingly average guy who turns out to be a master strategist.
A real David and Goliath situation.
Yeah.
God uses the unexpected to overcome the powerful. It's a good reminder. God's ways are not always our ways.
And then there's Deborah, prophetess and judge, a real powerhouse.
A force of nature. She commands respect. She rallies the Israelites and prophesies the downfall of Sisera.
Who was Sisera again?
He was the general of the Canaanite army.
Right. And Deborah teamed up with Barak to fight him.
Exactly. And of course we can't forget Jael. She played a pretty pivotal role in that victory, too.
That scene with the tent peg. Yeah, that's one for the history books.
It's a really bold act.
Yeah.
She saw an opportunity and seized it. God can use anyone to achieve his purpose. It doesn't matter your gender or social status.
It's a good reminder that courage can come in many forms. And speaking of courage, we can't forget Gideon. Now, he wasn't exactly known for his bravery at first, was he?
Gideon was all about overcoming doubt and fear. Remember how he asks God for not one, but two signs? The fleece.
Oh yeah, he needed that extra push to really believe. I get it, though. We all need a little reassurance sometimes.
Absolutely. What's really interesting, though, is even after the signs, Gideon's strategy against the Midianites is, well, it's very unconventional.
300 men, trumpets, and torches. It sounds more like a party than a battle plan.
It does, doesn't it? But it worked. The Midianites were totally thrown off. They were defeated by their own fear and chaos. It shows us that victory doesn't always come from brute strength. Sometimes you need strategic thinking and a whole lot of trust in God.
And then after this incredible victory, Gideon says no to becoming king. He knew true power comes from God alone.
It's a remarkable display of humility, especially in a world where power and ambition often rule. Gideon knew his place. It's a powerful lesson for leaders even today.
It's a big contrast to the story of his son Abimelech, which unfolds in Judges 9. Now that's a power grab gone wrong.
Oh, Abimelech is a classic cautionary tale. He murders his own brothers just to gain power. His reign is all violence and tyranny. It reminds us that ambition without limits can be very destructive.
And his death. Pretty ironic, isn't it? Killed by a millstone, dropped by a woman defending her city, almost like poetic justice.
You could say that. Then we move into Judges 10:12 and the cycle continues. But there's another judge whose story really stands out. Jephthah, the man who made that infamous vow.
Jephthah's story is just tragic. He promises to sacrifice the first thing that comes out of his house, if he wins the battle, of course.
Yeah.
And then it's his own daughter who greets him when he returns home.
It raises so many questions about vows, about thinking before you speak. It shows how even good intentions can have unintended consequences.
It reminds us that even those chosen by God, even those who achieve great things, they're still human, capable of making big mistakes. And then, of course, there's Samson, Judges 13:16, super strength, a weakness for Philistine women, and that unforgettable haircut. It's all there.
Samson's story is a classic. This guy is a paradox. Incredible power, yet prone to making terrible decisions. His relationship with Delilah, its betrayal, seduction, the whole package.
I mean, you know it's going to end badly, but you can't look away. It's captivating.
It's almost like a train wreck. But his final act of revenge is something else. Bringing down that temple, it's both awe-inspiring and tragic.
He dies with his enemies. It's a twisted victory, but a victory nonetheless. It really makes you think about human nature, about temptation, and that line between hero and self-destruction.
Absolutely. And as we get deeper into Judges, chapter 17 to 20, things take a darker turn. The state of Israel at this time, not great.
It feels like a downward spiral.
Yeah.
Micah makes his own shrine with idols. The Danites steal those idols and set up their own worship center. Then there's the story of the Levite's concubine. It's just awful.
That story is a real turning point. It shows us the consequences of turning away from God. The moral decay, it's chilling. The gang rape and murder of the concubine, then the civil war. It reveals the depths of depravity that can happen when a society abandons God's law.
It's a stark reminder of the fragility of social order. And then in Judges 21, we see the aftermath. Israel tries to rebuild the tribe of Benjamin, but the methods they use, taking virgins from Jabesh Gilead, abducting women during a festival, it's unsettling.
Definitely. The ending of Judges isn't a happy one. There's a sense of things unraveling, of things falling apart. There's that line that keeps coming up. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It emphasizes the lack of leadership, the moral vacuum that allows all these terrible things to happen.
It's a sobering reminder that even in a land chosen by God, human nature can still be prone to darkness and chaos.
And that's the power of the book of Judges. It doesn't shy away from the messiness of human experience. It forces us to confront our capacity for good and evil. It's a reminder that we are all in desperate need of God's grace.
It's heavy stuff. Really thought-provoking, though.
Yeah.
So as we move into the next part, I'm curious, what do you think all these stories are trying to tell us? How do they challenge or inspire us in our own lives?
I think one of the most powerful takeaways is the importance of remaining faithful to God. Even when we're surrounded by all kinds of temptations and distractions, look at the Israelites. They kept falling into idolatry and they suffered for it. It's a reminder that true peace and happiness can only be found in a right relationship with God.
That's a really good point. It's easy to judge the Israelites for their choices. But how often do we fall into similar traps? We may not be worshiping idols, but we have our own modern-day versions, don't we?
Absolutely. Think about what you prioritize above God. Is it money, your job, your social status, maybe even your own comfort? The book of Judges challenges us to look inward, to identify those areas where we might be compromising our faith. It really strikes me how, even with all this chaos and struggle for survival, the book of Judges really highlights that we need to take action. Each judge rises to the occasion. They embody the courage and leadership needed right at that moment.
And it's interesting how many women we've met so far who have played key roles. It really challenges that old idea that these ancient societies were completely dominated by men.
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, for example, as a prophetess and judge, she really shows that women were in positions of power. I mean, she initiates the entire campaign against Sisera.
And she even prophesies his downfall.
Right, at the hands of another woman, no less.
Yeah. And Jael, talk about boldness. She doesn't even hesitate to act. Her actions secure victory for Israel. It makes you wonder how many other women in history played crucial roles but never made it into the history books.
It really does. It makes you think, doesn't it? Leadership can take so many forms, and God can use anyone. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from.
Sometimes the quietest voice can make the biggest impact. And the book of Judges doesn't shy away from showing us the flaws of even the most well-known judges. They make mistakes,
Yeah.
sometimes with really bad consequences.
That's what makes them so human, so relatable. Think about Gideon. He starts off full of doubt, needing those signs from God to get going. But then, even after his huge win against the Midianites, he makes that decision, the one about the ephod.
What was the ephod again?
It was this kind of priestly garment, a symbol of religious authority.
Wow. Yeah.
But it ends up becoming a problem for him and his family. It shows how success can lead to pride. Even the most successful people can stumble.
It's like a reminder to stay humble, to remember where your victories really come from. Don't let success go to your head.
Exactly. And then you have Jephthah, whose quick promise leads to his daughter's death. It's just heartbreaking. It makes you really think about the promises we make, the danger of acting without thinking things through.
It's a stark warning to be careful what you promise, especially when emotions are high. Sometimes it's better to just stay quiet.
And of course, Samson, all that strength, yet so easily led astray. His weakness for those Philistine women and that infamous haircut.
It's almost like a Greek tragedy. He has this incredible gift, but is blinded by passion. What are our Delilahs today, I wonder? What temptations might be leading us down a dangerous path?
That's a really good question. We all have our weaknesses. The key is to be aware of them, recognize them so we can be on guard. We have to lean on God's strength to overcome them.
These chapters also show a decline in the moral state of Israel. It's like things get worse with every new judge.
Yeah.
What's behind this downward spiral, do you think?
Well, I think the influence of the Canaanite culture played a big role. You know, that incomplete conquest we talked about earlier. It's like a poison that slowly spreads, pulling them away from God towards those other gods, those false idols.
Like they're trying to mix two completely opposite worldviews,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't work. It creates this confusion about what's right and wrong.
Right. And you see this in the stories of Micah and the Danites. Micah sets up his own personal shrine. Then the Danites come along and steal it and make their own idolatrous center. It shows how far they've strayed from the true God.
And then there's the Levite and his concubine in chapters 19 and 20. That story is difficult to read. It's a stark reminder of what can happen when a society abandons God's laws, God's moral standards.
It's a pivotal moment in the book. The violence against her, the civil war that follows, it all shows just how far they have fallen. It's like their whole society is unraveling.
Judges 21 tries to deal with the consequences of this war, the fact that the tribe of Benjamin was almost completely wiped out. But their solutions, the way they find wives for the men, it just adds to the feeling of, well, moral ambiguity.
It's messy. There's no real sense of a good resolution. And it all points to how lost Israel is at this point. That line, that repeating line, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Really sums it up, doesn't it? It highlights how much they need leadership.
It's like a society without a moral compass. So, with all of this in mind, this chaos and moral struggle, what are the biggest takeaways for us today? What lessons can we learn from the judges and their stories?
Well, I think one of the most important lessons is this. We need to stay true to our faith, even when life gets hard and we're surrounded by temptations. Look at the Israelites. They kept turning away from God, and they always suffered for it. True peace, true happiness, it only comes from a strong relationship with God.
But that's hard, isn't it? How do we do that in a world that's so distracting, a world that often seems to be against faith?
You're right, it's not easy. I think the first step is recognizing those modern-day idols that are competing for our attention. What do you put above God in your life? Those are the values and beliefs that end up shaping our choices.
It's easy to lose sight of what's truly important when we're busy, or we're chasing success or comfort. We need to be intentional about making space for God. We need to do those things that keep us connected to Him.
Absolutely. Prayer, reading the Bible, spending time with other believers, it's all important. We need to be taking care of our souls, just like we take care of our bodies.
Something else that stands out to me is how God can use anyone to accomplish His plans. Look at all the judges. They all came from different backgrounds. Some were hesitant, some were bold, and God used each of them in a unique way.
The variety is pretty remarkable. Men, women, timid people, brave people. Some were natural leaders, others had to be pushed into it. But God saw their potential and equipped them to do His will.
God doesn't always choose the most qualified person, the one with the best resume,
Yeah.
Often it's the ordinary people, the flawed people, the ones who are overlooked. He works through people who are willing to let go of their own plans and say yes to Him.
Exactly. And that's a really encouraging message, isn't it? It means God can use our unique gifts and experiences, even our weaknesses and flaws. We don't have to be perfect. We just need to be willing to say yes.
And the stories of the judges also show how important it is to work together, to face challenges as a community. When the Israelites were united, they won big victories. But when they became divided and selfish, they were defeated.
We really are stronger together. We need each other's support. We need encouragement. And we need to hold each other accountable.
Especially nowadays. Everyone is focused on themselves. It's so easy to forget about the importance of community. We need those relationships that will help us grow in our faith and face the tough times.
Speaking of tough times, the book of Judges shows us what happens when leadership goes wrong. Remember Abimelech? His reign was driven by greed and violence. He really shows the damage that a power-hungry leader can do.
It emphasizes the importance of choosing leaders who are honest, humble, and genuinely want to serve others. Leaders who put other people's needs before their own. The kind of leaders who want to build up, not tear down.
And we see that good kind of leadership in Gideon. Remember how he refused to be king? He knew that God was the ultimate authority. His humility and trust in God are a good example for leaders even today.
It's a reminder that real leadership is about serving, about using your influence to make a positive impact.
The book of Judges, even though it's set in ancient times, still has a lot to say to us today. It teaches us about faith, leadership, courage, and all the complications of being human. It reminds us that we're all on a journey, and just like the Israelites, we will stumble and fall along the way.
But even when we're weak, God's grace is there for us. His power is made perfect in our weakness. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep our eyes on Him and trust that He'll lead us through. It's interesting, isn't it? With all this violence and moral gray area, the book of Judges actually points to a desire for good leadership. This whole period, there's no real central authority, and they keep saying, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It kind of highlights what happens when there's no one at the helm.
Yeah, like they're really craving someone to lead them back to God, to set things straight. They've seen what happens when everyone does their own thing, when they ignore God's law. It's not pretty.
That kind of sets the scene for the monarchy in Israel, right? They start to realize they need a king, someone to bring them together, enforce the law, and lead them back to God.
Exactly. They've had a taste of anarchy, of a society without a clear leader or any shared morals. They need someone to show them the way.
It makes you think about how important leadership is, even today. We need people who are not just capable, but also, rooted in faith and committed to what's right.
Absolutely. Leaders who inspire us, who push us to be better, who guide us towards what's good and true. Leaders who stand up for what's right, even when it's tough.
Thinking about all these stories, it feels like there's this constant struggle between human choice and divine guidance. God gives them this amazing gift, the Promised Land, but He also gives them the freedom to choose how they're going to live there. And, well, their choices have consequences.
It's a fundamental tension, isn't it? We all want freedom, the right to make our own choices. But real freedom, as the Israelites learned the hard way, isn't just about doing whatever we want. It's about choosing what's right, even when it's hard.
Makes you think about the choices we make every day, big and small. Are we using our freedom to chase our own desires, or are we trying to follow God's guidance?
The book of Judges shows how much our choices matter, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. Our choices shape us, they affect our relationships, and ultimately they determine where we end up.
One thing that really strikes me is the idea of redemption. Even when the Israelites completely mess up, even when they turn away from God completely, He doesn't give up on them. He raises up these unlikely heroes, the judges. They deliver the Israelites from their enemies and give them a chance to start over.
It's a powerful cycle, isn't it? Sin, oppression, repentance, and then deliverance. No matter how far we go, God's always there. He's waiting for us to turn back to Him. He offers forgiveness, a chance to start again. He never gives up on us, even when we give up on ourselves.
That's the message that really hits home, even today. We might not be facing armies or oppressors, but we all have our own struggles, our own temptations. We stray from God's path.
The book of Judges shows us we're not alone in this. God is with us, fighting for us, helping us break free from sin. But we need to do our part, too. We need to choose to turn to Him, to ask for His guidance, and to trust in His strength, not just our own.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the book of Judges, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember? What's the biggest takeaway from this whole exploration?
The book of Judges is complicated, full of challenges, but ultimately I think it's a story of hope. It shows us that even when things seem dark and chaotic, God is working. He's raising up leaders, offering His mercy. And He's asking us to work with Him to build His kingdom, both in our own lives and in the world. It's a call to action, to embrace our purpose and to make a difference.
That's a really inspiring way to end this. Thank you for taking us on this journey through the book of Judges. It's been amazing to hear your insights.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time.